David Bohm Seminar, Sunday, March 22nd, 1992, 4 o'clock afternoon session, Oak Grove School, Ojai, California.
Well, I'd like to begin by making a few comments on what happened this morning. I mean, rather than making them immediately, that will be the reaction of the conditioning to consider it. And I think, first of all, I would say that generally speaking, if people would try to leave more time to slow down, to not only to let other people talk, but to let the whole thing sink in, and it would make would make it all work a lot better. You see, we have to sort of learn that, and so that we're not making a rule, but sort of being sensitive to the situation. Now, I would like to say, I don't know, that there was the discussion that some people felt people weren't discussing their true concerns. You see, the feeling was that possibly when people get angry or when strong emotions come, then they're closer to their true concerns. Now, I would question that it's always the case. That you see, if the emotion of anger will be sustained from the conditioning, from the memory, and from the thought, right? So the anger has even less significance than the thought and the words. See, the words have much more reality than the emotion. If it is a true emotion, then it may be different. But anger, being sustained that way, is not a true emotion. It is really maintained by the conditioning, right, by the thought. So anger is even further from the source than the thought, and the thought may at least tell you something, if it's right. But the anger tells you almost nothing. You see that it's essential to see that it is not really important. Now, I can repeat what I've said many times here about Freud, that he had a cancer of the mouth, and somebody was talking to him about psychiatry, and suddenly he said, "But I realize you're ill, you have a cancer. Maybe it's too serious, you don't really want to talk about this stuff." And so he said, "This cancer may be fatal, but it's not serious." You see, that it's just... And similarly, we had this morning, that anger may be fatal, but it's not serious. It may destroy your heart or your lungs or your blood, but there's nothing serious or really important in that sense about it. It doesn't mean you should suppress it if it comes out, then we have to understand. If it doesn't come out, we will understand. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's better coming out or not coming out. But see, the perception that this anger is not really important would be almost the ending of it, because it is presenting itself as really crucially important, a crucial part of you. And the point is that the intellect may then communicate something about this structure and order and how it's happening, now, which may have much more validity than the feelings themselves. Now, I want to say that everything I've told you about perception and how you can make it work by bringing the thought into operation slowly, I am doing and have been doing. It is not purely the intellect, but it's essential to put it out in words, to communicate it. And you see, the essential point is whether it's clear, you see. And I remember many years ago, in the early 60s, I was having a conversation with Krishnamurti, and we talked for quite a while. And then at the end of it, he asked me, "What do I feel?" So I said, "I don't really feel anything, but it's a great clarity." And he got rather excited and said, "Yes, that's just it." You see, in other words, if there are true feelings, then they may be important, but usually our feelings are more of this thought variety, thought felt. Now, and see, seeing that they are not important may be a crucial step. See, if we say it's terribly important and significant that we're angry, but it isn't. The thoughts behind it are far more significant. To get hold of them and to see how they work. Now, yeah, so...
When you said they're more significant, you don't mean they're it's more valuable, but more significant just in terms of seeing how it functions.
Yeah, but it has more value. You see, the anger is a secondary value. It comes out of the thought. You see, it doesn't, once you've seen it's there, it doesn't tell you much more, right?
Well, the only importance that anger would have is that it's a telltale.
Yes.
That the thought, to me, it's very important in that it's a telltale that the thought has occurred.
Yes.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to recognize.
Yeah, but then if you see it in relationship, you see, if you see this thing separately, then it has no importance.
Right.
But if it's seen as part of the process of thought, then it is an important part of that. But then it's the thought that's important. The fact that it's anger is merely the way of reflecting back that this thought is occurring. Right?
Right.
So, but what's occurring is the crucial point.
But we have, I don't think you're saying that the thought itself is important. The content isn't important.
Well, the content will point to something. You see how the thing is working. It can be important. It's a kind of map. You know, we're saying that the cause, the source of the anger is the thought of, and if you can see the connection between the intention to think and the thought and the anger.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so it's the process.
It's the process. It's what's in between that's important, right? The relationship, right? And
The process of thought becoming aware of itself.
yeah.
Right. But when I heard you
In
say
that sense, important.
Right. I just wanted to clarify
Yeah,
that.
but when these things are seen by themselves, then they, especially the anger, has no importance. You see, or almost none. No. But it's presented as highly important. So now it's the relationship that counts. And see, the relationship is the mirror in which you can see yourself. That's Krishnamurti also said that quite frequently. And to be is to be related. You see, you may be related to objects, or in that way it'll mirror back you according to what you do with the object, or related to ideas and thoughts, or to feelings, or people, or all sorts of things. You see, and they all function as the mirror. So you see yourself in the mirror of relationship, and this is the essential point. Now, it's necessary to see yourself without words, but put it into words. Now, this movement of play is a nonverbal way of learning, which then, when it has functioned, it can come into the words, right? So it could be, see, the verbal part of thought should also know what has happened, and also it can be communicated, right? Now, as far as intention is concerned, you see, there may be superficial intentions coming from the conditioning, and there are deeper intentions. And you see, the deep intentions come from the unconditioned, from the unknown. And and I would say the deep intention behind this whole process, doing is to perceive and understand and, be aware of the thought, be aware of itself. If we can't do that, then the rest of life may have not much meaning. The whole of society has very little meaning. If a few people do it and society doesn't do it, it won't mean all that much, because society will eventually drag it all down.
So at that level, intention, I mean, it isn't a personal thing. It's not my intention or your intention.
It's intention, yeah.
Simply intention.
And if everybody is sharing that intention, then our minds are all one, you see.
Intended intention?
Well, in a way, but it's an intention which is not produced by saying, I have committed myself to doing this thing. But it's sort of there naturally on its own, from the perception of the necessity of this happening.
What is your sense of what could happen then in this group if we all shared the same intention?
Yeah, well, I think that would come up in the question of dialogue, you see, which I hope we can move into.
But actually, what was said before means that at a level which we may be unaware of, we necessarily do share the same intention.
Yeah, well, I think that in some sense we wouldn't be here except having at least implicitly the same intention, though we may not know it explicitly, or we may or may not.
Is it necessary to try to verbally express that deeper intention?
Well, there may be times when it's helpful, at other times it isn't, you see. I mean, I don't think we make a rule. Right? But you see, right now, we'll try in a way to express this intention as we go along, you see, but the expression of the intention would properly come from the perception or the sense of the intention, which is nonverbal. Because you get a feeling of intention, right?
Listening, for instance, it means that we have a common intention if we let you talk. That seems that we have a common intention. If we listen a little bit more, more attentively to you at this moment, specifically, we don't have sufficient time.
Well, I think it would be better if you could say that there is a common intention to get to the root of all this, which sometimes will call for me talking or sometimes other people talking or so on. You see, the secondary intention could arise and so on.
Yeah, just to prove that point, if I talk right now and someone gets upset with me, and then it's on some level they realize that I actually have the same intention as they, then perhaps there would be that understanding of the deeper intention would release the anger. I mean, we would see the anger as unimportant and perhaps see something more implicit.
Well, eventually it would come to the proprioception of the anger, and where it would be so evident that it's not important. And
but at the same time, if you really understood in yourself that connection with everyone, maybe you wouldn't talk because you would allow someone else to talk.
well, there are times when you might talk, there are times when you might not. Yeah.
Right.
You see, you can't make that rule, right?
But when we realize we have a limited time, then I think we have to look at that.
But you see, if we all share this intention to get to the bottom of this, to get to the root of it, then we have the deep intention that the source of the mind is common. You see, the source of the activity, which we previously attributed to I, the subject. You see, but now it's a common self, if you want to put it that way, a common quintessence. And it can easily flow between us.
And this experience of a limited time, which is maybe the general state that we live with day after day, might evaporate in an instant because this deep intention might be timeless, you see. It might just take an instant, and if that was there, there'd be abundance of energy.
Yes, perhaps we'll come to the question of time and the timeless if there is time.
Is this a deep intention available to all?
Yes.
Or everyone does not make it? Is there a choice that we make?
Well, I don't think you choose it, but if you perceive this situation and the importance of the necessity of getting to the bottom of this, then the deep intention will naturally come out, right? Will develop. And it is not based on thought or words, but it may give rise to thought, or use thought or words, giving rise to them to express and to communicate. So intention is not necessarily a deliberate thing. It can be in the superficial level, a very deliberate choice of intention. But in the deeper level, you can't make that. There's no choice, you see. It just happens naturally and necessarily. And I would say that if people have been coming, for a long time, or have been interested for a long time and have pursued this thing, that it's almost certain evidence that the deep intention is there, at least implicitly. If the deep intention to pursue this to the bottom is there, then in a way that becomes the basis of trust, right? That will take the first priority. But if all of us have different intentions, then there's no ground for trust, right? Different deep intention.
Deep intention innate in us. When I think yesterday you mentioned as children, you said I am the source I am, and as children, as very young children, we're in touch with it, and then when we try to express it, then conditioning starts coming in, where we forget if there is such a thing as I am. Does that deep intention flowers within I am that?
Well, I am could be a superficial intention, which appears to be deep and powerful, or it depends on how you use the word. I think you see Moses in the Bible wanted to use the word in Mount Sinai in the sense of the deep intention common to all, to the universe. It would be the intention behind the creation of the universe. And that would raise the question: is perhaps the universe is in some sense conscious or alive? You see. But we don't have to settle that issue, you see. And now is that all clear then? Now you see the point about dialogue is that a great many of our basic assumptions and limitations and conditions are collective. They're in the culture, in the society, and they're really the most powerful ones. In fact, the notion of I am is a collective notion. It could never have been developed by an individual, and only people talking to each other could have developed that. Pointing out to the child who he is and so on, and using the word I am to associate what he's supposed to be, right? And I am and me and myself. So the collective thought, the collective conditioning is the major one, the conditioning to nationalism, to religion, to the pattern, the image you have of yourself, how you fit into society. Well, all sorts of assumptions. And in fact, you will find most of them are collective. Now, they form a culture, and then within a culture, are subcultures where there's some of this is common and other parts are different. So the subcultures may not really have a common intention. And see, out of the assumptions will profoundly affect the intention and the action. And now when people start to talk to each other in that situation, they will be talking at cross purposes, and they will not communicate. You see, now one may notice this is the situation that generally happens when a lot of people get together, that except on very superficial things, or in which people don't seem to be able to communicate. They can't talk to each other. See, people can actually do a lot of things together, like sing together, or dance together, or possibly work together, but the one thing they can't do is talk together. But if we can't talk together, we will not be able to do anything. See, whatever you think of words, nevertheless, the whole society depends on them to organize itself. And it has to be coherent, you see. Now, we want to say that if our own thoughts and our own system is coherent, they will all work together instead of at cross purposes tearing each other to pieces, and we will build up a coherent energy, which is much more powerful. I mean, like a laser. See, in ordinary light, the waves go in all sorts of directions, canceling, but in the laser, they all work together coherently, and then that can cut through things which tremendous power. And if we bring into this laser the thought of all of us, then it would be still a lot more powerful than if it all is coherent, right? So if we had a coherent culture, a coherent society, then I suspect that something very remarkable might happen. You see. That it could cut through all the things which are blocking us. You see, it would cut through the smog, the electrochemical smog. It might just like a hot beam dissolves the fog in a sunbeam. It dispels the fog. Right? And once that is gone, then there is clarity, and memory is no longer confusing the issue, and all these problems might go, you see. Now, but we can't establish that on purpose. This is something which is a kind of vision that might guide us. But we can't say how to bring it about. We have to learn, you see, as we had to learn how to use a mirror. And okay, now, you see, now suggesting dialogue may be able to do this. It may help us to learn to talk together coherently and to think together. You see, thinking together is crucial. It's very uncommon. Usually people's thoughts are opposed to each other or independent of each other, cross purposes to each other. But if people are thinking together, somebody may start an idea and somebody else picks it up and somebody else picks it up. So it's the same. That's what happens in your own brain too. One part picks it up, then another, then it may go out and be picked up outside. So the whole system spreads out and brings in far more resources, far more power and far more resources. See, so I wanted to give a kind of vision of dialogue to sort of get some notion of where it's moving. So we say, in some sense, we start out with we say dialogue should not restrict the topic to an agenda or something, or a purpose, but it does start out with a kind of purpose, which is to learn to talk together and think together. But that purpose is not a rigid purpose, because learning is not a rigid thing. It's not laid down in thought what learning is. So those words, that is the purpose. I'm really pointing to something, this deeper intention, beyond thought. It's signifying that, right? And also it signifies the value of this whole thing, you see, which should move us, give us energy to move us. So we have a purpose and a value, and a significance, and meaning. So dialogue, in fact, dialogue, we could say, is the flow of meaning between us, as suggested by its Greek root, you see, dialogos, right?
You once succinctly defined culture as shared meaning.
Yes.
So when you're talking in terms of dialogue being a flow of meaning between us, when you talk in terms of some kind of a global culture, you're really talking in terms of a global shared meaning.
The global shared meaning, or as far as it will go, you see. Now, if the meaning could be shared among 40 or 50 people, that would be a tremendous... It would also be not a rigid culture, you see. You say that aletheia means not rigid, or... does lethargic mean rigid or something? Or is it connected?
Lethargic means sleepy.
Sleepy, but is it the same root? I don't know.
Aletheia means out of the sleep, and this the friend said, not without rigidity.
Without
They have the
rigidity.
two meanings.
So it's flowing. You see, aletheia is this flowing movement of meaning. You see, it includes that, right? You see, so that's a key aspect of truth, right? You see that. So, okay, so now, logos, dia means through, and logos is the word here. It refers to the meaning probably, and dialogos means that the meaning is flowing among us. Now, dialogue is uncommon, you see, in our society, very, very uncommon. People say they're having dialogues in the United Nations and all sorts of places, but they're not having the dialogue in that sense anyway. They may at best be negotiating and trade-offs. You see, that may be the beginning, but it isn't dialogue. You may have to negotiate between us, but that could only be the first step. They never actually share meaning. I see different countries, people in different nations and different cultures and different religions have quite different meanings which they don't share. So how are people, all of us have come from different subcultures, forming here a nascent culture, or we call it a microculture, you see, which has in it a great many different meanings that don't cohere. When people start to talk, this comes out. You see, we have different basic assumptions, and we saw, today how this was coming out. Even an assumption as to how fast we should respond is part of the culture. In some cultures, it's very fast, and in some, it's very slow. But all kinds of assumptions of that kind. And we're not aware of these assumptions. They're tacit assumptions mostly. But they come out when we are in the group, not only through their conflict, but also when you see somebody or other people trying to share meaning and not succeeding, you can see implicitly what the assumptions are and bring them out. Right? You see, so therefore, some people who are not caught so much in these assumptions can see both assumptions and bring it out, and then everybody can see it. Right? And you see, there's enough different. That's why we need a fair-sized group. You see, if you have a few people, they're not enough to do that. The people sort of adapt to each other and don't disturb each other and don't question, don't bring out each other's assumptions. They avoid conflict as far as they can. But in a larger group, you'll find people will do that too, but it cannot be done indefinitely because sooner or later, this thing is going to happen, right?
Not to disturb there, but it can go on for a very long time.
Yes.
And if it doesn't, it almost always would be because there was some controlling factor.
Yes, well, yes, then we have to stay with this controlling, we have to become aware of this controlling factor. There's another assumption there, you see, which has to be revealed, which is that we should avoid these things, right? This is part of the culture. Now, therefore, let's say you have seen that this is going on, and then you say, well, this is going on. People seem to be assuming tacitly that they've got to avoid anything contentious or difficult. And then people can look at that and say, is that so, you see? And we can have dialogue. You see, now I begin to share meaning. I see, as opposed, as I said, to a discussion, which has the same root as percussion, concussion. It means breaking things up, and it's an analytic. At best, it gives an analysis, which may have some value, but it is not the dialogue. So we have to see the distinction of a discussion and a dialogue.
Would it make sense to you to talk about a culture of dialogue?
Well, the culture, yes, the ordinary culture has a great many meanings which are not fully shared. You see, some people share some of them, and others are highly incoherent. Now, if well, we have to see what it would, but we're saying it will turn out that if we share all the meanings, then it will be coherent. Now, it doesn't mean that we all agree to all the meanings, but we have to see the necessity of listening to all the meanings, not by forcing ourselves or committing ourselves to do so, but rather seeing the necessity. So if we share all these meanings as well as the deep intention, which is part of the meaning, then we see there's a further common consciousness. Right? So you see, in a sense, we're, especially as it flows back and forth between us, one consciousness is coming into being.
Culture.
Yeah, it's a different kind of culture that hasn't existed. It may have partially existed in some societies in the past. The Greeks tried to develop some sort of notion of dialogue, but it was rather limited. And they had a notion of koinonia, which was connected with their democracy. Later, the Christians used it too. It means impersonal fellowship, you see. That this gives the sense of sharing, you see, feeling.
Actually, the definition is communion.
Communion, but it means impersonal fellowship, you see. And see, even in the Christian religion, they talk of the fellowship of the Holy Ghost, which means that the Holy Ghost is like the Holy Spirit is like the flow of meaning, right?
Kinonia.
How do you pronounce it?
Kinonia.
Kinonia.
It means society. The same words were used for society, the same word for communion in the church.
Yes.
Kinonia.
Yes, well, what's behind that is the sort of implicit thought that the right society would be based on what would grow out of communion. Right?
That's the society that has the dialogue, otherwise the jungle.
Yes. You see, so the dialogue, a true society and a true culture would arise out of communion or out of impersonal fellowship. You don't have to know the other people personally to have this fellowship. And you see, it's interesting, the word compassion has a similar, it means fellow feeling or fellow suffering. You see, passion, its root is suffering, pathos and patience. You suffer. You see, if you're frustrated, you need patience. And you have to suffer, right? Is to stay with it. And the compassion means that you suffer together, right? Which helps to share it and so on. And also it includes the idea of passion as somehow eventually liberating energy and so on too. Well, anyway, so such a society would be fellowship, would also be one of compassion and communion. And in a way, people were, they didn't really get a lot of that in the ancient Greek society, but at least some of it was implicit. And if you went back to some of the very early hunter-gatherer tribes, then there's more like it. You see, they have only 20 to 40 people in the tribe, and if they sit around in a circle, and apparently some anthropologists have noticed that they talk apparently to no end or purpose with no aim or goal, and they finish for no visible reason, and then after it's all finished, they all go out and seem to know what to do. So they are sharing this meaning. Now, it's of course a much simpler situation. There are only a few people comparatively, and also the thoughts are comparatively simple. And even then it's limited. Probably, if we want to bring it up, then some of the older men or even the older women would probably carry more weight, whether that would make sense. You see, the chief was, in such tribes, was not a man who ruled by authority, but he was a sort of a wise person that people would listen to. And his chief function was to hold back the young warriors who were hot-headed and wanted to have raids. Now,
those cultures that still exist, like the Hopi culture, to generally within the religious circle, consensus is the manner in which they
Yeah.
function rather than a democracy.
Yeah. It's a small enough culture for that to happen. See, democracy it doesn't work too well with this.
Within one small village, you can actually have 6 small kibbutz, each of which has its own little group, and there's consensus within that kibbutz in one tiny little village.
Yes. So, see, by the time you get over about 40, it'll be very hard to have this. Now, if you have less than 20, then, or 15 or so, then we don't have enough points of view. It would then tend to be more like a family or an extended family, which is a highly hierarchical society, whereas this is not hierarchical at all, right? And authoritative. You see, as the society got bigger, it became necessary to establish hierarchy and authority to try to hold it together, but you can easily see that also tore it apart, right?
You know, people have latched on to your 20 number.
Well, it's approximate.
Well, I know, it might be 21 or 19.
Or 15.
But no, I say that because, I mean, it's just become a magical number and everybody wants to have groups that are 20. And very frankly, it doesn't happen. And I mean, we've had Thursday night meeting here for years that are maybe 12 people.
Yeah.
And I assure you we have enough points of view.
Yeah.
I don't know if we need...
Yeah.
No, and I say that deliberately because I'm not sure... It has to be 20.
Well, it might even be 12. You see, there must be more than, say, 5 or 6 anyway.
Okay.
I mean, the reason... see, this idea was of Queen... How do you pronounce it? Quinonia? Quinonia was first suggested in that form by Dr. Damari, who practices in London. And he hit on 20 people. And later he decided that it was hard to get 20 people. Yeah, right. And he tried it with 15 or 10.
I mentioned that because I think we all feel that we're failing because we haven't hit 20.
No. It's a sort of an arbitrary number, but somewhere not too far below 10 anyway. And
right.
if you get up above 40, then it becomes very unwieldy. Yeah. Or even 40 might be unwieldy.
You can even fail with 12.
Yeah. Well, you can fail. And you see, the point is now that we have got frustration. You see, when we try to communicate with all this non-sharing of meaning, then we are frustrated. And since communication is felt to be very important, the frustration will be powerful. It will give rise to anger and rage and hate. And and that, of course, we have to stay with too, right? And you see, one of the questions is, what shall we do with frustration? You see, there's no society which is not frustrating. There will never be an ideal society which doesn't frustrate you in some ways. Now, you see, now, there are often, especially among left-wing people or New Age people, there's often a kind of tacit assumption that frustration is a good reason or justification of anger, that anger is the necessary consequence of frustration. Many people have that. See, when people who talk about powerlessness say, I'm frustrated, I'm powerless, and if I had power, then I'd be all right, you see. But then if I don't have power, I can get very angry about it. I don't know. I detect that sort of implication in the way they talk or write. You see, but is that true? You see, does frustration necessarily lead to anger and hate, or is it contingent? It depends on something. See, it may depend on the assumption that is what has to happen, right?
One of the operative words of that movement you're talking about is empowerment.
Empowerment, yes. It's a very aggressive word. You see, the way they use it is extremely aggressive and flows out of the anger which they've got. And you see, the sense of justice, of justifying anger, is also a part of that. Now, you see, the Hezbollah, the party of God, is constantly talking about justice. Now, that's the surest way to get very angry and say that I'm right.
David, I'm not sure, but I think that the word empowerment is also used in psychological terms to help people who may feel like victims to take more control and responsibility in their lives, and it's used in a very positive way.
It could be positive,
and also
yes.
in the women's movement to help women have a stronger sense of self-esteem. And again, it's used in a very positive way.
It could be positive, but a great deal of it is used the other way. Yeah, well, it can be both ways. We have to watch this.
saw the metaphor of frustration in terms of the stream, like literally water flowing, and there's a rock there. It frustrates the flow, and so I mean the water doesn't get angry or whatever. It just finds another way around.
Yes. Does frustration necessarily lead to anger, or frustration leads to suffering? The reaction to suffering may be anger in the hope of ending it, you see, by attacking the source of the suffering and eliminating
outlet. There's no outlet, so there's a frustration.
But even if there is one, you see, you're going to be frustrated in the long run. If you're angry and you're not going to be rational or reasonable, and you're going to do things that you don't want to do and be compelled to do them, and you're going to be frustrated in another way.
On the other hand, frustration then may be our possibility if we approach it in a different way.
If we can learn from frustration to stay with frustration, see, frustration means suffering, and staying with suffering, patience, it will be the crucial point. Then you may discover a way around, as you say, or a way through, or something can happen. But you see, getting angry is seldom of any significance. If somebody steps on your toe, you might have an outburst of anger for a second to let the person know what he's done. But if you keep it up, it's going to go wrong. You keep on blaming him and saying, "What do you mean by stepping on my toe?" And you don't have any regard for me. So anyway, in the dialogue, there's going to be frustration. It's important that, as we understand it, it's going to be there, and we have got somehow to stay with it and meet it, and so on. You see that but we'll find that when we start it, we don't. You see that we don't give time. It goes too fast. We don't stay with suffering. We get angry and try to destroy what we think is the source of the suffering, and so on. And people share all that too. You see, that's also a common consciousness. See, all this anger, rage, hate, suffering. The suffering and the anger, rage, hate attempts to destroy the cause of it is common too. You see, we share that, but sharing that doesn't, in the beginning, help us. But it's important that we do share. You see, these are negative features of consciousness that we share, some of them. And we have to stay with that. You see, now, in other words, there will be displays of anger, and in these displays will be visible possibly the assumptions behind it. And now, if some people are not drawn into it as much as others, being from another subculture, they can sort of diffuse it, point out what's behind it, and then everybody sees. Right? You see, establishing a common consciousness again at that point. Now, so we can learn from anger, we can learn from suffering, and so on. Now, you see, you may get started out by being annoyed by some people talk all the time. They talk very easily, seem to monopolize the whole thing, and other people have assumptions which get them to hold back. And they get very annoyed, and the people who talk sometimes get annoyed with those who don't, saying, "Why don't you talk?" and so on. So all of that has to come out, you see, now. But the deeper point is the basic collective assumptions about the nature of the self, the nature of society, the nature of our purposes and goals, and what our intentions are, and meanings are, and so on. And so we have to continue and go on with this dialogue regularly, I say once a week or once 2 weeks, or it might be less or more. And that's not a formula that I'm giving you. So so you may then get periods in which it seems you're sharing meaning and everything is going fine, and then suddenly up comes a meaning you don't share and it goes wrong. Now, see, we don't say, well, now it's failed. You see, it's not our purpose to have a constant state of euphoria or good feeling, though if that comes, fine, you see. Now, it's not our purpose to produce an end or a goal of a certain kind. You see, the only purpose is to learn to talk and think together. That's not really a purpose in some sense. It's a deep intention. So anything, in principle, anything might be part of this conversation. But of course, dialogues may be established in more limited groups, say in schools or industry or somewhere, where they will somewhat focus on a more restricted area, which will have its problems, that will limit the communication. But if people feel that that's necessary, then they may start that way, and they may later let it widen out.
I have a question that if a group is doing fairly well, I've had people come and accuse the group of having collusion. And how can you distinguish? I mean, I don't know. What does that mean to you?
Yeah. Yes, well, what is collusion? It means playing false. You see, ludere is to play, you see. Play to fool, you see, to play. In this case, see, illusion is playing false with perception, and delusion with thought, and collusion, people playing false together to maintain illusion and delusion. Now, so is that what they mean, that you're maintaining illusion and delusion? Yeah. And well, you have to look at it and say, are we maintaining illusion and delusion? Yeah. And they can point out, yes, I think these are the illusions, you listen. This is the ideal situation, but people, you may get very angry at what they say, or they may get angry at what you say. And then you answer back and say, no, that's so, or that's not so, or yes, that's so, we've got to change. See, that's the ideal, right? But we won't meet the ideal. There's not going to be perfection anywhere in the world. Right?
Yeah, but if we're thinking together,
yeah.
I mean, somehow that was, I've heard many people say that's collusion. I mean, just because we have...
No, it's only collusion when we use it for deceptive purposes. You see, people collude in criminal cases, in crimes, because they want to deceive, they defraud somebody, right? Yeah. If people work together, talk together, think together, I mean, you would say every time people work together in an industry, they're colluding. You see, that would be foolish. I mean,
There's groupthink that happens somehow, that often within groups where they're deluding themselves.
Yeah, it's true, it happens. But say thinking together, groupthink is not thinking together, you see. It's really fooling yourself about it.
You're talking about the process where people think together as opposed to people thinking together about a specific bank job or whatever.
Yeah. Well, they think together about how to take advantage of somebody, to a competence job, right?
The usual criticism, I think, of collusion is that somehow you're fooling yourself and you think that you're thinking together and you're not.
Well, then you have to say that and say, why do you say that it's so? You see, in what way are we fooling ourselves? You see, you really require that they start to try to draw them into the dialogue.
That's what I was seeing. I mean, they're setting themselves outside, so can you share a meaning with them? I mean, just in that conversation, at least, they have some concern. They're criticizing, but...
But what happens is many of these people don't come back, so you can't have that exchange.
Well, there's nothing you can do about it.
But I think it's important for people who feel that way about a particular to come back and discuss it.
Yes, well, you can say that perhaps they're not all that serious, you see, and therefore that suggests that their perception of collusion is wrong, that it's already an illusion, right?
Well, you have to ask, so whether you're defending something. So if you think you have established something which is genuine communication, then, well, look at it. Let's open it up.
Yeah.
Sure. Part of the essence of dialogue is the investigation or the exploration of assumptions, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of the group's presuppositions. So within that, collusion ought to be revealed if one's serious about that as their man.
If there's collusion, it might typically be for the purpose of not exposing these assumptions, you see, which we've talked about here is happening. See, many people are saying people are colluding here to avoid exposing basic assumptions, which were felt to be very significant and necessary.
Is there a way for us tonight in this group to join together in a deeply held intention?
Well, we can't outline this way. You see, I'm trying to paint a picture of what this is about, and then from that you try to move, you see. You see, by learning. See, but how would you go about seeing whether we're colluding? I don't know. You see, I'm trying to say the question has suddenly occurred. Right?
Starts by trying to sense an underlying common intention. And then the collusion would make itself obvious, I imagine.
Yeah.
I would think if I wanted to hold on to this point of view, if I wanted to hang on to something, then I would suspect something.
Yeah.
So immediately I would sense if there was something I was hanging on to, then I would be suspicious.
Yeah. If you're defending an assumption is suspicious, right? You see, we say a mistake, you should learn from the mistake rather than defend it. You see, defending the mistake is already at least delusion, or beginning of delusion, and if people defend it together, it's collusion.
So if we feel defensive, if the group feels defensive, then
Or several members feel defensive, then they're colluding.
Well, when you say that if they sustain that feeling,
Yeah.
they might feel that way for a moment or for an hour.
Yeah.
But you have to give it a little room to
Oh,
work
yeah.
itself out.
Yeah, we have to allow room for that. Yes. But if you find sustained avoidance of the issue, then you could say that's collusion. Now, see, you could say it depends on how firmly this whole practice is adhered to. See, when there's evidence that there's something wrong with it.
People who are thinking that the others are colluding are in collusion.
Well, if several of them might get together to present the picture that this group is is caught up in collusion, right? You see, on the other hand, they may give good reasons why they say so.
Conspiring.
Well, conspiring means breathing together, you see.
What you asked for is actually a rather subtle thing, and I wonder whether it is even possible to positively come to a state of deep intention. This seems to be the desire for many groups, and it seems to generally fail because I wonder whether this can be positively approached. In a sense, maybe you clear up the fog, or you clear up the things which are, generally held as the intentions, and then something may arise, from the side or the back door. Don't get right at it.
Well, I think most people here must see that there has to be a deep intention to get to the bottom of this, but there may be other intentions which are in the conditioning which block it. Yeah.
So we could hold a common intention to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is it we're trying to get to the bottom of?
This whole process of fooling yourself, getting caught in confusion. So how thought has become so destructive.
I don't know if this is an aside, but it seems to me that if a person experiences conflict, that is a manifestation of the deep intention. The conflict being a rejection of what is going on. And that very rejection is the desire to move. To move
where? To move where?
Not necessarily to move anywhere, but for this suffering within myself already is an expression of the deep intention. That it's not a philosophical thing. The very fact that I suffer, I might say, is a proof of the deep intention.
There is the deep intention, but the suffering is the fact that it's blocked, you see, at the same time.
The suffering is the rejection of the disharmony, of the lack of.
Well, the suffering is maybe an attempt to reject the disharmony, you see. And see, at some stage, we'd say that in itself is another mistake, right? You see that the disharmony must be seen. See, to blast the disharmony is more disharmony. You see. But if we can have the proper perception of how it's all coming out of thought, then seeing that the feelings are coming out of thought, seeing that anything comes out of thought and the thought being incorrect is enough to end that, if it's working right.
Okay. The fact of suffering, I don't know, the reason I like it so much, I guess, it seems to me totally outside of my thinking or any philosophical movement. The very fact that I suffer is already a movement toward truth.
Yeah, it comes from the conflict of the movement toward truth, let's say, and some resistance, I think, from the conditioning. But you see, if the movement toward truth is very weak, then you start to avoid it. The suffering may be reduced.
The conditioning is the avoidance, is a movement away from truth.
Yeah.
Okay. So the conditioning, which is a resistance, produces a suffering, which pushes one toward truth. I think the reason I'm saying this, I don't see that we have any need to look for or try to find a deep intention, that it's in us whether we like it or
Yeah,
not.
well, it's there implicitly, but we can now say, okay, all of us have it, perhaps everybody has it. It may be very buried in many people. Say, okay, all of us have it, perhaps everybody has it. It may be very buried in many people, so that they can't be aware of it. See if we could be aware of it, then we are that much stronger in the whole thing.
Everybody has the same deep intention, but it's just deeply buried in some people, and other people it's more near to the surface.
The very nature of the organism contains that it's contained in that.
A need to get to the bottom of things, if that's
Yes,
a definition.
it's nothing personal to me or you.
I don't know, you could discuss it or share the meaning.
What feels frustrating, using our word frustrating to me, is that to get to the bottom of something without examining what that frustration is difficult. In other words, we're kind of talking in an abstract level, so that if we actually had a frustration, I don't think that we have time to actually follow it down to the bottom. But if this group were to remain together and we stayed with a potential frustration or a conflict and really focused on it, we could, in fact, reach a common understanding of that.
Yes, I mean, the point is the suffering is basically due to thought, I suggest. And as thought is constituted at present, all thought must bring about suffering. But of course, it may change. You know, if the thought process can be aware of this and get to the bottom of it, then it needn't, you see. So, see, at present, there is no thought which will not sooner or later bring about suffering.
Aren't you, in a sense, contradicting what you just said?
Why?
Because we don't necessarily have to follow a specific thought.
No, but any thought which is dominated by the conditioning will bring about suffering. But all thought is connected to the conditioning, and you can't keep it out. It may be made weak for a while, so this thought remains relatively free. But sooner or later it'll come in, you see.
As long as we're examining our thinking as opposed to what we're thinking about, as long as we're examining our thinking per se rather than the specific, maybe there's a chance.
Yeah, well, see, so another way, but I wanted to say that we should rather expect suffering. It's not a surprise. And that it will require this patience and this compassion and in the group also when we break through it to some extent, you see, the anger and hate may go and the energy would turn to koinonia.
Our conditioning thought is the one that blocks the movement, the deep movement of the energy.
Yeah.
To start moving. And then maybe we start watching that conditioning thought.
Yeah, it seemed to me that if this lock were broken, the suffering, then a lot of energy would be released, you see. And this suffering becomes energy, that becomes passion as energy. You see what is transformed into energy.
Passion as energy, isn't there a word for that?
Well, I don't know, but the word passion is ambiguous because its basic meaning is suffering. But also we use it in the sense of intense energy of some sort. And why are they connected? You see, possibly because a tremendous energy is locked there, and if it were released, then having gone through suffering to the end, then energy is released, you see. See, because it might be confusing at first, passion usually means a lot of energy, and it sounds as if why should we connect it with suffering?
Because it's blocked.
Yeah, that's the energy. See, so suffering is the first form of energy that we meet it, and then we meet it as great energy.
You also use suffering in another way that comes you to suffer, to allow to happen.
Yes, that's right, to let things happen. That means a kind of patience or letting things happen, right? But these things you have, patience is a kind of suffering. You wouldn't ask for it if it weren't somehow your wish weren't to do it right away.
Maybe be a kind of energy which is, I mean, a passionate person may be seen as a very, dynamic, active person, but it may require a great deal of energy to just let things happen, to not interfere, to just be along with things as they go.
Yes, I mean, the energy is the energy to see the process of interference, and then when that is seen, then the energy greatly increases.
The people who are impatient are mainly the people who are really affected by more of the conditioning thought.
Yes, see, impatience is the very fast reaction. I say we could say that if in a group like this, the fast reaction is a sign of impatience. People don't want to suffer their frustration, but want to destroy it by some aggressive rage or anger.
I was colluding just a moment ago. I was thinking that the energy that we don't talk about, maybe we could talk about, is just the energy of love. That maybe that's the energy that is the non-thought energy that maybe we could dialogue about.
Yes, but how would you dialogue about it? You see, if the whole thing is blocked, it's not going to manifest. You see that it's there as a potential. Now, love is almost undefinable, so it's hard to talk about it. I mean, we'd have to get much further. See, I think that going through compassion gets in that direction.
You're saying that it's very difficult to get there in a practical way just by diving right into it.
Yeah, well, you can't dive in because there's nowhere to dive. I mean, you don't know what it is or how you're to do it. You see, so anyway, that's this process of dialogue. This is the sort of the vision of it, the picture of how it might work, or at least it helps to guide us. It's a kind of imagination that helps guide us, you see, and we have to be ready to change it or correct it if it isn't working, but that's the sort of thing that we'll want to start. You see, so in the dialogue group, everybody's in a circle because then that it puts everybody at least to equal terms in that way, and we don't have a position of leadership. You see, if you have some other shape, then somebody takes the position of leadership, and that center already operates as a meaning to cause everybody to focus there and to give the authority. You see, so, but that's not enough to stop it. You see, the authority could still be easily with the circle, but it's a useful step. And then we should have several facilitators, you see, who may be able to comment on the thing and participate to some extent, and and so on. But their job is to work themselves out of the job, to become less and less facilitating. And we know it's going to take time. You see, that we're going to have to come back to it again and again. And one or facilitator or two, at most three, depending on the size of the group. Now beyond that, there isn't a lot of organization or structure and of a fixed nature. See, so we do fix that much, but Damari likes to talk of the facilitator as leading from behind, which is a useful way of thinking about it. But eventually, the group would function without a specific leader. See, that's the picture or the vision. Anybody might, for the moment, take that position and give it up. So it has no fixed purpose. You see, if we say learning to talk together cannot be defined as a fixed purpose, you don't know what it means until you do it. Now, that will then create a new culture, as I say, a new society, one where the meaning and the energy will flow together. And see, this collective assumptions have tremendous power, and the anger can come out in the collective thing where other people can see it. And it's sort of another phrase that Mari likes to use, which I think is useful, is inside and outside. That you see outwardly what's happening, but that also is what's happening to each person inwardly. That you can only see this outward thing properly from the inward. That anytime, say, you look at a television drama, there's nothing but spots of light, electrons, but you get feelings and so becoming and people and this and that. But see, all those feelings are really your own feelings, which are attributed to that image, right? So similarly, if people are going through all this in the group, then your own feelings, which will be basically similar to theirs, will tell you what's happening. You're learning not only about them, but about yourself and about all the relationship. You see, so it's very useful to have something from the outside as well as the reflection from the inside.
I'm wondering about this energy of love, which we seem to be so blocked against. Since the energy of love may be one of these underlying, like an energy of intention that we all hold in common, I wonder if one can choose to allow that love energy to sort of find its way through the barriers and the blocks.
Well, I don't think that this is a matter of choice any more than the deep intention is. You see, would your deep intention be to have this happen? You see, you cannot choose the deep intention. If it's a superficial intention, it won't do it. You see, I think that will happen implicitly if we can get along into impersonal fellowship and compassion and so on. That already is beginning to move that way. You see, and the thing will go further.
So you would hold the intention of fellowship rather than
Well,
the intention
our intention is to get to the bottom of what's stopping it, but we have all this in the back of our mind that out of this may emerge fellowship, and compassion, and meaning flowing together, you see.
So the inference is we don't really know what the result will be.
No, but we're suggesting this could be a result, and it looks plausible. We may have to change the view if we find it doesn't work, but I think there's enough evidence to suggest that it looks reasonable. And it has happened.
I thought you were going to say something.
I said that it's very hard to consider a positive intention to do something because we don't know what it means to do it, you see. But a negative intention is easier. An intention to deal with the negative is easier. We have got to learn how that negative is connected with thought, with the intention to think and so on. So that we can see the thing arising in thought and thought arising from whatever it is, the impulse to think. Right?
Being the blocks and the distortion.
What?
The negative being the blocks and the distortion.
Yes, the negative is all this confusion going on about whether feelings are independent or are they dependent on thought. As a typical example, or going on is to say, is the ecological problem the result of thought, or is it just an external problem? Can we treat it that way? You see, all through the society, that's the basic source of the trouble. It happens outwardly and inwardly. I mean, all the problems of society basically have that nature. The ones we can't solve, that is. And so we say that the other problems are in principle solvable. See, I think all these problems could be solved. Say, the ecological problem could have been solved long ago if it hadn't been for that confusion in thought. The energy problem could have been solved. You see the connection between the self-image and all these thoughts. And so say, if you are investing in nuclear energy, or if you favor it, then you will have a strong desire to defend that. And distort, and you will engage in collusion with others to do so.
What you're saying to our situation in the last 2 or 3 days, there's some people who feel things have been going too slow. There's some people who have been feeling things have been going too fast. There are people who want to explore this particular avenue or that particular avenue. Essentially, isn't that sort of a microcosm of what the outer
Yes, I mean this. So this confusion in the outer, this failure of harmony, is also in the inner. Now, it's hard to know how you would judge going too fast or too slow. But we can see that there's the negative thing, that reaction is too fast. People have been jumping in. This is a part of the culture, that people do jump in too fast. Now, probably in these tribes of hunter-gatherers, they probably, my feeling would be that they would respond very slowly. I don't know if it's true, but I couldn't see how it would work otherwise. Giving plenty of time for people to talk and plenty of time to think and work it out.
If we were to just focus, let's say, on the ecological problem as a group here, and we would use dialogue, and we would simply talk about it from our various perspectives, and you're saying that would help us lead to a solution?
Well, I think we would soon discover that the ecological problem is not independent. It cannot be solved on its own level, because it arises from thought and from this whole confusion going on. So we would have then to say that if we don't go into thought, we're going to find different people who don't agree on how to solve the ecological problem and don't listen to each other. And they get into high temperature situations and so on. And they don't work together, they work at cross purposes, and all the energy is sort of dissipated. So then you say, okay, this ecological problem didn't begin with the ecology anyway. It began with thought, which produced this terrible situation, the thought of how to exploit nature and so on, or why we must do it. And we have to go into all that. So the ecologists would have to talk. There are different kinds of ecologists with different basic assumptions. They'll have to listen to that, to all those assumptions. And if they don't, it's plain they're not going to get anywhere.
So if we just took that one issue, hopefully within this group, and probably doesn't exist, but within, we would get the right types of people that would represent people who would bring the various perspectives together.
Well, whatever it is, you see, in a group like this, we can't focus only on ecology. There are all sorts of people here, you see. But if it happens that there's a group of ecologists, they could begin on ecology, and then they would find that they were spreading out, because if you can't, you also must bring in economics, and you've got to bring in a lot of other things. And you can't stop it, so you can't restrict it. You see, the ecological problem is not separate from the economic problem, and both are due to thought.
You see the world situation getting better from the last time we met?
Well, in some ways better, and in some ways there are more difficulties. Obviously, the danger of worldwide nuclear war has seized it. The communist regime has collapsed with all its, I want to call it tyranny, and collusion and deception. And some of the people who replace it, they not know exactly what they're doing, but they seem to be more serious than the communists were. We still have some of the communists want to take power again, but if the economy fails, then they may do so, or somebody similar. And see, the danger is that the former Soviet Union is falling apart, and the parts start to fight each other. They start to sell their nuclear technology or other arms to surrounding countries in Asia. And we build up a very volatile situation. You see, because we also add to that the West is also selling. See, every country who makes arms say, we cannot do it economically if we only make our own arms. We must sell it to somebody else. Now, that's thought, right? See, so therefore, they sell the arms to all sorts of people, and then lo and behold, they say, it's terrible, these people are armed, they're doing terrorism, they're going to attack us. And we have to attack them first, and so on. And then, but every country that makes arms is compelled, or at least thinks it's compelled, to sell them. Right? Now, that is a very highly contradictory policy. Yeah. Okay, we'll break it. I meant that, you see, that it's the thought, this incoherent thought, that has to be seen, because the The fact that it's so contradictory doesn't mean these people are idiots or stupid. It means that they're trapped in this thought process. Okay, we'll have a break.
Does anybody want to order cakes?